I wanted to do this video a while back when I actually, or post having COVID, because I felt that it was very important to address the issues around it, which me personally, as somebody who's highly sensitive, the anxiety levels really high. And I felt that a lot of videos, or a lot of people talking about COVID would speak about the physical effects, but not so much the emotional and deeper lying psychological effects of COVID. And so, as a highly sensitive person, that for me, while I did have some physical symptoms, the emotional ones and the anxiety levels were insane. And I felt that I just wanted to raise awareness around that as well. Um, and as the time went on, it just became kind of irrelevant because everybody went back to normal life. But as South Africa hits its third wave, the numbers are increasing, and on social media, people are just talking about how COVID is just affecting everybody again because of, there's an increase. The death rate is increasing, and just the effects of so many people having it. It kind of stirred a lot of feelings, and what I would put down to actually having COVID PTSD. So to put it into context, my family and I went back to South Africa. We reside in Dubai, and we went back to South Africa to see the family. But knowing the risks, we planned it really carefully, where we would travel before the rush and we would return back to Dubai. Only one school open, so we would miss all the rush basically. And we had actually gotten to South Africa just before the second wave, so we were not traveling in all of that. But either way, we managed to catch it within just a week of being in South Africa. But it was really a traumatic experience because we didn't actually have a home in South Africa, so we didn't have somewhere to isolate. So it was very, very traumatic, not knowing what was happening and where we were going to be. So when it actually happened, I identified 5 phases of COVID that I had personally experienced, and it was shame, it was guilt, it was regret, it was fear, and then it was anxiety. And it was the shame of actually having COVID, and everybody just kind of saying you should have known better, you shouldn't have traveled, you kind of brought it upon yourself, even though we took the most precautions. We were fully covered, more so than the flight attendants themselves. We sanitized every single, like probably 5 minutes we're sanitizing. We took all the precautions that we could, and still managed to get it, but there was still that shame that we had it. There was the guilt because we were in contact with family, so there was the guilt that we could have passed it on to our parents, our kids, and we carried that guilt because we were in contact with our loved ones, and we could have passed it on to them. And then it was the regret, or the regret of actually having gone back home. If we didn't go back home, none of this would have happened. If we had just done A, B, and C differently, then everything would have been different. And then it was the fear. It was the fear of what was going to happen to us, and the fear of if we had passed it on to somebody else, what was going to happen. We didn't know what was going to happen. And then it was actually not having a place to go to. It was not having anyway, I say just not knowing. It brought about a fear of what the future was going to bring, and then finally the anxiety from all of that. It just brought about a lot of anxiety within us. So while I did suffer, I did have some physical symptoms of not being able to breathe properly, having a bit of shortness of breath, and some other physical effects. The emotional effects for me personally were ridiculous, and it kind of carried through. So that for me was what I actually felt with COVID. And I had to deal with it, and my husband having to admit it into hospital on Christmas morning, the two of us being isolated, and then him being admitted, and then me being alone, not knowing what was going to happen to him, not having any contact with any doctors, hospitals, him being on oxygen, and me not knowing what the future was going to go. The anxiety just shot through the roof, where I had to actually remind myself that I had to breathe, so that because if anything had happened to me, there was nobody around me that could do anything. So just I had while going through all of this and having the shortness of breath, I just had to remind myself to literally just breathe. It was that insane. um, but having post all of that, 7 months later, we thought we'd just move on from it, but there seems to be PTSD. So when seeing people, what they're going through, triggered off what we actually went through, all the trauma of not only having COVID but everything around it. For us personally, it was not having a place to stay. So you couldn't isolate, and you couldn't just run away and just be away from everything when you needed to be. It was just the fear of being around loved ones and possibly, infecting them. Um, so there is actually, if you do not deal with it, or you just think it's not that serious, it actually could possibly come back months later and affect you. So I guess COVID PTSD is a real thing. So emotionally underlying, there's a lot of effects from COVID. It's not only the physical symptoms, but there's the emotional underlying symptoms as well, which can be quite traumatic if not addressed, or just not realized or acknowledged, because it's serious. It is serious, and the effects are far more. It's just, there's so much gravitas to it that we don't even realize. It's not only physical, it's psychological, it's emotional, and it's deep underlying, that it could come back months later with you even not consciously being aware of it. And so, like many traumatic experiences, I guess COVID is not very different, where the stress induced from the trauma experience can show up weeks, months later down the line. So it's not something to be taken lightly. The effects of it are, whether physical or emotional, are longer lived. So just be safe. If you do get COVID, just be sure to take as much caution as you can to check in on your mental health or mental state from it, as much as you do your physical state. It's very important, because it could trigger later on, and it could be something devastating. So don't take it lightly. Do not take the emotional effects of it lightly, because the trauma it's great, and it's something really, really serious. It's not just a flu. It's not just something to take lightly. So be safe and just be aware. So take care, and just realize that it's very serious. It's not just having the flu. There is something deeper to it. So don't take it lightly, and just be safe.